Welcome to Deep Fear, where your darkest nightmares turn real. Tonight's story may just keep you awake, so let's start the video. And don't forget to subscribe. I had always been a fan of urban exploring. Abandoned hospitals, old schools, burned-out motels. But there was one place none of my friends would dare to step foot in. The house on Gravedigger Road. They said the house had been abandoned since the early 80s, after an entire family disappeared overnight. Some believed they moved away quietly. Others claimed they were murdered, and their bodies were hidden somewhere inside. But there were more chilling rumors, too. Whispers about black candles in the attic, symbols carved into the floorboards, and shadows that moved when no one was there. I thought it was all just urban legend. I was wrong. My friend Eric dared me to spend one night inside. He offered me $500, enough to cover 2 months of rent. I agreed immediately, arrogantly confident. It was a cold, damp evening when I finally stood in front of the house. The windows were boarded up, paint peeled off in long, sickly strips, and the front porch sagged dangerously. The air smelled like mold and wet leaves. I pushed open the creaky gate and stepped onto the porch. Every step groaned under my weight. When I reached the door, I noticed strange symbols scratched into the wood. Spirals, stick figures, shapes that looked almost like eyes. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to continue. I twisted the rusty doorknob and pushed. The door swung open slowly, revealing a wide hallway swallowed in darkness. I turned on my flashlight. Immediately, I saw the walls were covered in old, yellowing wallpaper. It had rotted in places, revealing splintered wooden panels beneath. A staircase led upstairs, its railings cracked and warped. To my right, a doorway opened into what looked like a living room. The smell inside was suffocating. A mix of mildew, urine, and something else. Something coppery and metallic. I decided to explore the living room first. I stepped cautiously, shining my light around. The room was filled with broken furniture. A dusty couch, its cushions ripped open as if clawed by an animal, sat in one corner. On the wall above it, there was a family portrait. A mother, a father, and 2 children, all smiling stiffly. The mother's eyes seemed to follow me as I moved. I turned away quickly. Next to the couch, I found an old wooden rocking chair. It faced an empty fireplace filled with charred wood. On the mantelpiece above the fireplace, there were several framed photos. Most were so faded I could barely make out the faces. But one photo caught my attention. It showed the family standing in front of the house. Except someone else was in the background, a tall, dark figure, almost hidden among the trees. I brought the photo closer, squinting. The figure's face was completely blacked out. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Suddenly, the rocking chair creaked behind me. I spun around, shining my flashlight frantically. The chair was moving gently back and forth, as if someone had just stood up from it. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Then I heard it. A soft shuffle coming from the hallway. I turned slowly, expecting to see an animal, maybe a raccoon. But there was nothing. I decided to move on before my courage left me completely. I returned to the hallway and headed toward the kitchen. The door swung open easily, revealing a room in worse shape than the living room. Cabinet doors hung off their hinges, dishes were shattered across the floor, and the walls were covered in deep scratch marks. On the far side of the kitchen was a door leading to the basement. It was sealed shut with a heavy wooden plank nailed across it. I felt an overwhelming urge to open it, but I resisted. For now. Instead, I looked at the dining table. There were 4 plates set, as if the family had been about to sit down for dinner before they vanished. Rotten food still clung to the plates, covered in thick green mold. As I examined the table, I heard a faint whisper. I whipped around, shining my light everywhere. "Help us!" The voice was so faint I thought I imagined it. "We're so cold." My skin crawled. I took a deep breath and backed away slowly, almost tripping over a fallen chair. I knew I should leave. But some twisted part of me wanted to see more. I wanted to know what really happened to the family. I stepped into the hallway again, glancing toward the staircase. I felt a sudden weight in the air, as if the house was watching me. Waiting, I raised my flashlight and started up the stairs. Each step let out an agonizing creak, echoing into the darkness above. At the top, a narrow hallway stretched into shadow. 4 doors, 2 on each side. I chose the first door on the left. The bedroom was small, likely the children's room. 2 twin beds sat against opposite walls. The sheets were stained and torn, stuffed animals scattered on the floor. A small dresser sat between the beds. On top, a cracked snow globe lay in pieces. I picked up a fragment and turned it over. Inside, I saw a tiny figure, a mother holding 2 children's hands. But the father was missing. As I turned to leave, I noticed something under one of the beds, a small yellowed journal. I reached down, my fingers trembling, and pulled it out. The cover read, "Lucy's Diary." I flipped it open carefully. The handwriting was messy, childlike. "Daddy says we have to stay quiet. The man in the woods is looking for us. Mommy cries every night. I don't like it here anymore. I want to go home." My blood turned to ice. I turned the page. "I saw the man in the hallway last night. His face was all black. He said he wants to take me and Billy away. Mommy screamed, 'Daddy hit the wall!'" I swallowed hard and flipped to the last entry. "The man is inside now. Daddy is gone. Mommy is bleeding. Billy won't wake up. The man is calling me. I don't want to go." I slammed the diary shut, heart pounding. Suddenly, I heard a thump in the hallway, a slow, deliberate step. Then another. It was coming toward the room. The thumping grew louder, echoing down the hall. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand. My heart was pounding so loudly in my ears that I couldn't hear anything else. I didn't move. But then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of something dragging across the floor. I had to leave. There was no question about it anymore. I turned quickly, my shoes scraping against the dusty floorboards, and sprinted toward the door. But as I reached for the knob, the air around me grew cold. I stopped in my tracks, a sick feeling crawling up my spine. I couldn't explain it, but I knew something was behind me. A cold breath caressed my neck. I spun around, shining my light. Nothing. But the shadows in the hallway were wrong. They twisted and shifted like they were alive. I bolted for the stairs, my pulse roaring in my throat. As I rushed down, I heard the unmistakable sound of someone following me. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, like they wanted me to know they were there. I reached the bottom of the stairs and turned sharply toward the living room, nearly tripping over the broken furniture. My breath was ragged, my eyes darting around, trying to find any escape. But it felt like the house itself was closing in on me, pressing down on me from every angle. I ran toward the front door, but just as my hand reached for the handle, I heard something soft, almost like a whisper coming from behind. "Please don't leave." It was a woman's voice, weak and desperate. I turned around, fighting the urge to run. There, in the center of the room, stood a figure. Her hair was long and unkempt, her face pale and drawn. Her clothes were tattered, and she seemed to be fading in and out of focus. She wasn't like the other shadows in the house. She was real, and she was looking directly at me. "Help me," she croaked. "I need you to help me." I stood frozen in place, unsure whether to approach her or run. But something about her, something in her eyes made me hesitate. Her lips trembled, and she took a step forward, her movements slow and unsteady. I couldn't explain it, but I felt an overwhelming need to help her. I couldn't just leave her here. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, the floorboards creaked loudly behind me. I turned just in time to see something large and shadowy looming in the doorway. It wasn't human. Its form was too distorted, like it was made of smoke and ash, but I could see the glint of something bright. Eyes, glowing red and full of malice. Before I could react, the figure lunged towards me, its mouth opening wide, revealing rows of sharp black teeth. I screamed and jumped backward, narrowly avoiding its grasp. The woman's eyes went wide with terror. "Run!" she screamed. "Run! Get out of here!" I didn't need another warning. I spun around, sprinting toward the front door. The creature was close behind, its breathing labored, like it was struggling to move through the air itself. I reached the door, my hand fumbling for the handle. It wouldn't turn. My heart slammed against my ribcage. I was trapped. Suddenly, the woman appeared beside me, her hand outstretched. "You have to leave now. Please, you're the only one who can stop it." Her voice was pleading, desperate. I looked at her face, my eyes wide with fear. "How?" I gasped, my voice shaking. "How do I stop it?" The woman's face twisted into a grimace. She looked pained, as if her very existence was being torn apart by something unseen. "You can't stop it," she whispered. "But you can get out. You can leave before it takes you too." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the woman's hand, and with a final desperate pull, I yanked the door open. It felt like the entire house groaned in protest. The walls trembled, and the floor buckled beneath my feet. I sprinted into the yard, gasping for air. The night outside was cold and silent, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just left behind. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running. When I finally reached my car, I slammed the door shut behind me, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I fumbled for the keys, desperate to start the engine. It roared to life, and I sped down the road, not once glancing back at the house. I drove until the familiar landmarks of the town reappeared, and only then did I slow down. My breathing was still shallow, my mind racing. The next day, I went back to the house. I didn't know why. Maybe I thought I could face my fears, or maybe I needed to see it with my own eyes. But when I reached the front gate, something felt different. The house was gone. There was no trace of it. No broken gate, no decaying porch, no sagging roof. It was as if the house had never existed. I stood in the middle of the overgrown yard, confused and shaken. The only thing that remained was a single, small object, the diary. It was lying in the grass, its pages open, but the words inside were unreadable now. I picked it up and turned it over. On the back cover, in faded ink, it read, "You can never leave. The house will always find you." I ran. I barely slept that night. I kept hearing the woman's voice in my head, repeating the same desperate words. "Help me. You're the only one who can stop it." Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her pale face, her terrified eyes, and behind her that monstrous shadow with its impossible mouth and glowing eyes. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, a product of fear and exhaustion. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I found the diary again on my kitchen table. I knew I had left it outside, but there it was, damp, torn, and stained. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The pages were stuck together, but when I pried them open, I saw new writing that wasn't there before. "You can't escape. He knows you now. He wants you to finish what the family started." My mouth went dry. I dropped the diary and backed away. But I couldn't take my eyes off it. Finish it, or become part of the house forever. Those words were written over and over in large, frantic letters. I grabbed my phone and called Eric. When he picked up, his voice was casual. "Yo, did you make it through the night? You owe me some videos?" I tried to explain what happened, but he laughed it off, saying I must have taken something or hallucinated. "Bro, you're freaking yourself out," he said. "There's no house there. You probably got lost and ended up at some old shed." I wanted to scream at him, to make him understand. But when I looked outside, I saw something that froze my blood. Eric was standing in my front yard, but he wasn't moving. He just stood there, staring at my window, his head tilted unnaturally to one side. I dropped the phone, my fingers numb. Eric's eyes were pitch black, like deep pits in his skull. Slowly he raised one hand and waved. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. When I looked again, he was gone. I ran outside, scanning the yard and the street. Nothing. It was like he had never been there. I called him again, my voice shaking. He answered from his own apartment. He sounded normal, completely unaware of what I had just seen. "Man, chill out," he said. "You're seriously scaring me now. Just get some sleep." But I knew what I saw. Something had followed me home. I barely managed to stay awake that day. Every shadow seemed to move. Every noise in the house set my heart racing. At sunset, I decided to check my car. Maybe I had dropped something. Maybe there was evidence, something to prove I wasn't losing my mind. When I opened the car door, I nearly vomited. The back seat was covered in deep scratches, dark, sticky stains, blood soaked into the fabric. A single message was scrawled into the leather of the back seat. "Welcome home." I slammed the door shut and staggered backward, hyperventilating. I thought about leaving town, driving as far away as possible. But something told me it wouldn't matter. I felt tethered, like an invisible chain wrapped around my chest, pulling me back to that place. That night, I couldn't stay awake any longer. I fell into a restless sleep and found myself standing in front of the house again. Except this time it wasn't decayed or broken. Fresh paint, clean windows, a warm glow coming from inside. I could hear laughter, a family eating dinner, children playing, a mother humming a lullaby upstairs. For a moment, it felt almost peaceful. But then I saw the tall, dark figure standing at the edge of the yard. It watched me silently. When I stepped forward, the ground beneath me turned soft and wet, like I was sinking into mud. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't obey. The figure glided toward me, its black eyes fixed on mine. When it reached me, it opened its mouth, impossibly wide, and whispered, "Come home." I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. It was still dark outside. I looked around the room, my breath shallow. Then I noticed the diary again. It was on my bed, open to a new page. They never left. The family is trapped. Only you can finish the ritual. Only you can free them, or join them forever. My mind raced. Ritual? Was that why the family disappeared? Was that why the woman's ghost kept begging for help? I knew what I had to do. I had to go back. I had to find out what they started and finish it. I packed my flashlight, a crowbar, and a small bag. I drove back to Gravedigger Road, heart hammering with every mile. When I arrived, the house was there again. It looked even worse than before. More decayed, more alive. The front door was wide open, as if waiting for me. I stepped inside, my flashlight sweeping across the rotting walls. The smell was stronger now, a suffocating mix of mold, blood, and something that smelled like burnt hair. I heard whispers immediately. Dozens of them. They seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Help us. Finish it. He's coming." I moved slowly, checking every room. The living room, the kitchen, the children's bedroom, all exactly as I remembered. But then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A door beneath the staircase. It looked newer than the rest of the house, reinforced with heavy locks and metal plates. I approached it cautiously. On the door, someone had carved words into the wood. "The final room. Enter alone." I swallowed hard. With trembling hands, I forced the door open. Behind it was a narrow staircase spiraling downward. A damp, rotten smell wafted up to meet me. My flashlight barely pierced the darkness as I descended. At the bottom, I found a small, square room. In the center, a circle of black candles burned, their flames unnaturally still despite the drafty air. Symbols covered the floor. Eyes, spirals, stick figures, all in a thick, dark substance that looked disturbingly like blood. And at the far end of the room, a large mirror stood, covered with a dusty sheet. I took a hesitant step forward. The whispers grew louder, rising to a deafening chorus. "Finish it! Set us free! Finish it!" My hands shook violently as I reached for the sheet. I hesitated. I could turn back, I could leave and never return. But deep inside, I knew it was too late for that. With one final breath, I yanked the sheet away. My own reflection stared back at me, pale and horrified. But it wasn't just me. Behind me, dozens of figures stood, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. And in the center of them all stood the tall, shadowy figure. Its hands rested on my shoulders in the reflection, even though I felt nothing. It leaned forward, whispering into my ear, "Welcome home." My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the mirror. The figures behind me shifted and writhed, their hollow eyes locked on mine. I tried to move, but my feet felt fused to the cold floor. I watched helplessly as the tall figure in the mirror slowly leaned closer, its grotesque mouth inches from my ear. "Finish it." The words echoed in my head like a bell tolling in a crypt. Suddenly, the flames from the black candles flared, throwing monstrous shadows against the walls. The whispers turned into screams, hundreds of voices screaming at once, rising and falling like a storm. I forced myself to turn away from the mirror and looked down at the symbols on the floor. They pulsed and shimmered, as if alive, and the dark substance they were drawn with seemed to bubble. I saw something glinting near the base of the mirror, a small, rusted knife. I picked it up, my fingers wrapping around the corroded handle. The instant I touched it, a sharp pain shot through my arm, like electricity. I looked at the blade more closely. Words were etched into it, barely legible. "One must be taken to free the rest." A sickening realization washed over me. The ritual needed a sacrifice. Someone had to die for the souls trapped inside to be freed. I felt my knees weaken. I wanted to drop the knife, to run out of that house and never look back. But I knew that wasn't an option anymore. I looked back at the mirror. My reflection no longer looked like me. Its skin was pale, its eyes black and empty. It smiled at me, a slow, unnatural grin that stretched impossibly wide. "One must be taken," it whispered. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned sharply, raising the knife defensively. There, standing in the doorway to the basement, was the woman. Her eyes were filled with tears, and her hands trembled as she reached toward me. "Please, you have to do it, before it takes you too," she cried. I felt the cold presence move closer, like a suffocating fog. The shadow figure emerged from the darkness, towering over both of us. Its hands stretched out, long and gnarled, reaching for the woman. She screamed and fell to her knees. I knew what I had to do. I stepped forward and grabbed her arm, forcing her to look at me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Before she could react, I raised the knife and plunged it into her chest. Her scream was cut short, her eyes wide in shock and pain. She collapsed to the floor, her blood spreading across the symbols on the ground. The candles flared again, and the entire room shook violently. The shadow figure let out an inhuman roar, shaking the walls and causing dust and debris to rain down from the ceiling. Then, as if sucked by an invisible force, the shadow was pulled toward the mirror. The figures behind the glass began to scream too, their voices echoing in my skull. They pressed their hands against the mirror, their faces contorting in agony. I dropped the knife and backed away, my ears ringing from the screams. One by one, the figures dissolved into black mist, disappearing into the mirror. Finally, only the tall shadow remained. It clawed at the glass, its mouth stretching wide in a final, silent howl. And then, silence. The mirror cracked. A spiderweb of fractures spread across its surface before it finally shattered, falling to the ground in 1,000 pieces. The candle sputtered out, leaving the room in darkness. I stood there, shaking, trying to understand what had just happened. I looked down at the woman's lifeless body. Her eyes were closed now, her face oddly peaceful. I fell to my knees beside her, my head spinning. Was it over? Had I really set them free? I forced myself to stand and stumbled back up the stairs. The house was different now. The walls no longer whispered. The oppressive, heavy air had lifted slightly. It felt empty. I reached the front door, expecting to see the night sky and my car. But when I stepped outside, I found myself standing in the middle of a forest. The house had vanished behind me, leaving only trees and thick fog. I turned in circles, disoriented. Where was I? Then I heard it, a faint giggle. I spun around and saw a small child standing among the trees, watching me. His skin was grayish, his eyes black and hollow. More children appeared behind him, stepping out from the fog. Their faces were blank, their mouths stretched into silent, eerie smiles. Then I realized they were the children from the mirror, the ones I thought I had freed. The woman's voice echoed through the fog. One must be taken, but not you. The children started to move toward me, their small hands reaching out. I stumbled backward, but they closed in, surrounding me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Their hands grabbed my arms, my legs, my throat. I felt my body go cold, my vision blurring as the forest spun around me. Then, darkness. I woke up lying on the ground in my yard, the morning sun burning my face. I sat up, coughing and gasping. I was home. My car was parked in the driveway, my front door open. It felt like I had just returned from a nightmare. But when I looked down, I saw my hands. They were covered in black stains, the same tar-like substance from the house. I ran to the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes, they were completely black. I leaned forward, touching my face, trembling. And then I saw them. Behind me in the mirror. The children, the woman, the tall shadow, all standing silently, watching me. My mouth moved on its own, whispering words I didn't understand. "Welcome home," the voice inside me said. I stood frozen in front of the bathroom mirror, my reflection no longer entirely my own. My eyes were black voids, swallowing the light. Behind me in the mirror, the figures watched, motionless, the woman, the children, the tall shadow. I tried to move, to scream, but my body felt like it belonged to someone else. Then, my reflection grinned, a wide, jagged, impossible grin. "Welcome home," I heard myself say again, though I never meant to speak. The woman in the mirror stepped forward. She placed her cold, translucent hand on my shoulder. Even though it was just a reflection, I felt her touch, cold as a grave. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but instead of words, a thick, black fluid poured out. It dripped down the glass, splattering onto the bathroom floor. I staggered backward, slipping on the dark liquid. My head cracked against the sink, and stars exploded in my vision. When I looked up again, the mirror was gone. In its place was a doorway. A dark hallway stretched beyond, lined with hundreds of doors on either side. Each door had a name carved into it, but the writing was so old and faded that I could barely make them out. I crawled forward, unable to stop myself. The hallway felt endless, and with each door I passed, I heard whispers, cries for help, guttural growls, and frantic scratching sounds. I stopped at a door with my own name carved into it. My stomach turned, my hand moved on its own, reaching for the doorknob. When I turned it and pushed the door open, I saw a small, dimly lit room. Inside, dozens of objects from my life were scattered. My childhood toys, broken camera equipment, old notebooks filled with my scribbles, photos of my parents, and, most disturbingly, the knife from the basement altar, now clean and gleaming. In the center of the room stood the tall shadow figure. It tilted its head slowly, studying me. "It's yours now," it rasped. My body convulsed as a burning sensation surged through my veins. I fell to the ground, my muscles locking up. I saw my own skin begin to gray and crack like dried clay. My fingers stretched unnaturally long. My teeth felt like they were splintering and regrowing, sharper, more jagged. My reflection appeared on the room's walls. Dozens of distorted versions of me, each one more monstrous than the last. The tall figure stepped forward, merging with my body. I felt its presence inside my skull, like oily tendrils wrapping around my thoughts, squeezing my mind. I tried to fight, screaming silently in my head. But it was too strong. The last thing I saw before my vision blacked out completely was the knife lifting itself from the floor and slicing across my reflection's throat. A gurgling laugh filled the room as everything went dark. I don't know how long I was gone. When I opened my eyes, I was standing on the front porch of the house on Gravedigger Road. The sun was setting behind me, painting the sky blood red. I looked down and realized I was holding a new diary. Its cover was made of pale, cracked leather that looked disturbingly like human skin. I opened it. On the first page, in my own handwriting, were the words, "Welcome to your new home. Finish what they started." I heard a car approaching. A young man stepped out, holding a camera and a small bag. He looked around nervously, exactly like I had on that first day. He spotted me and called out, "Hey, do you live here? I heard there's an abandoned house with a crazy history. I wanted to make a video." Before he could finish, my mouth moved on its own. "Come inside," I heard myself say, my voice echoing unnaturally. The man hesitated. Then, as if compelled, he took a step forward. I smiled, or whatever was left of me smiled. The house seemed to pulse with excitement, its walls shifting like lungs drawing a deep breath. The young man disappeared into the house. I followed, shutting the door behind us. The cycle had begun again. I wandered through the house, feeling its structure pulse under my feet. The walls whispered now in a language I understood, the language of hunger, of pain, of endless repetition. I watched the young man from the shadows as he explored. He called out occasionally, asking if anyone was there. I felt a surge of joy. Not my own, but the joy of something far older, deeper. Eventually, he found the basement door. I saw the terror in his eyes when he stepped inside, saw the symbols, the candles. I stood at the top of the stairs, holding the diary and the old knife. When he looked up at me, he began to scream. I moved down the stairs slowly, each step echoing like a drum beat. I raised the knife. In his final moments, I saw the same realization cross his face that had once crossed mine. There was no escape. As his screams echoed through the house, I felt the structure shiver with satisfaction. The candles flared. The mirror at the far end of the basement glowed faintly, showing a new reflection. My own face again, but changed. Monstrous, grinning, eyes blacker than night. When it was over, I dragged his body to the center of the circle. His blood seeped into the floor, feeding the house. The walls pulsed, the floors shuddered, and the shadows danced joyously. I returned to the mirror, my new throne. The faces behind the glass watched me silently, each one a prisoner like me. Once human, now husks. I raised the diary, opening to the first page once more. Finish what they started. Outside, I heard another car pulling up, another curious visitor. I smiled. The house would never be abandoned again. It was alive, hungry, and now so was I. I've always had an obsession with abandoned places. There's something hypnotic about crumbling walls, dust-choked hallways, and the echoes of lives long forgotten. That's how I found myself driving deep into the woods on a moonless night, following an old trail that barely showed up on my GPS. I was looking for Saint, Dimphna's Asylum, a psychiatric hospital that had been shut down in the 1950s after a series of mysterious deaths and patient disappearances. Locals said the place was cursed. Some claimed to hear the wailing of former patients echoing through the trees. Others whispered about experiments so horrifying they were never officially recorded. Of course, to me, those rumors were part of the appeal. I wanted to see for myself, document everything, maybe even film it for my small YouTube channel. As I finally saw the outline of the asylum through the trees, a shiver ran down my spine. The building looked like a massive, dark skull against the night sky. Broken windows stared out like hollow eye sockets. Vines and moss choked the walls, as if the forest itself had tried to strangle the place into silence. I parked the car at the edge of the overgrown path and stepped out, flashlight in hand. The air was thick with the scent of rot and mold. Each step crunched on layers of fallen leaves and debris. I made my way to the main entrance, which had been ripped off its hinges decades ago. Inside, the darkness felt heavier, almost physical, like a damp cloth pressing over my face. I clicked on my camera and started recording, my voice shaking slightly. Exploring the infamous St. Dimphna's Asylum tonight? If you guys hear or see anything I miss, leave a comment below, I said, forcing a laugh. My light panned across the entrance hall, revealing shattered chairs, overturned wheelchairs, and fragments of old medical equipment. An enormous staircase curled up into the darkness, and branching hallways yawned in every direction. I picked a hallway at random and began my descent into the asylum's heart. Doors lined the walls, many hanging off their hinges. Each door had a metal placard with patient numbers instead of names. I peered inside one room and saw rusted bed frames bolted to the floor. Leather straps dangled from the corners, restraints that had once held patients down. Scratches covered the walls, some so deep that chunks of plaster had come off entirely. A small, filthy mattress lay in the corner, and in the center of the room, scrawled in what looked like old blood, were the words, "We never left." I backed away quickly, heart pounding. A sudden crash echoed from deeper in the hallway. I froze. My flashlight flickered once, twice, before coming back on. I swung it around frantically but saw nothing. I took a few cautious steps forward, shining the light into each room. That's when I saw a shadow move across the far end of the corridor, a tall, thin silhouette that slipped from one doorway to another. I called out, my voice trembling. "Hello? Is someone there?" Silence. I decided to follow. As I approached the last room, I noticed that its door was completely missing, and the walls around it were scorched, as if someone had tried to burn the entire section down. Inside, I found something even more disturbing. The walls were covered in hundreds of photographs, black and white images pinned and stapled directly into the plaster. They showed patients with wide, terrified eyes. Some were strapped to beds, others to chairs. Many looked emaciated, their bones pressing against paper-thin skin. In the center of the wall, a larger photograph showed a group of doctors and nurses standing proudly, but their faces had been violently scratched out, leaving only dark voids where their eyes and mouths had been. As I examined the photos, a cold breeze brushed the back of my neck. I spun around, but the doorway was empty. Then I heard a voice, faint, like a whisper carried on the wind. "We never left." I felt a sudden sharp pain on my shoulder, as if invisible fingers had clawed into my skin. I screamed and stumbled backward, crashing into a metal bed frame. My flashlight clattered across the floor, its beam spinning wildly across the walls. In the brief moments of light, I thought I saw figures standing in the room. Pale, gaunt patients in hospital gowns, their mouths hanging open in silent screams. When I finally grabbed the flashlight and shone it directly, they were gone. My breath came in ragged gasps. I checked my shoulder and saw deep red scratches that hadn't been there before. I had to get out. I sprinted down the hallway, my boots echoing like gunshots. When I reached the main entrance, I found it blocked by debris that hadn't been there before. A pile of broken furniture, bricks, and rusted bed frames stacked up to the ceiling. I turned and saw more shadows flickering down the corridors. A low, guttural chant began to rise all around me, as if hundreds of voices were whispering in unison. "We never left! We never left!" My mind screamed for me to find another way out. I ran to the staircase and bolted up to the second floor. The chant grew louder, vibrating in my skull. On the second floor, I saw rows of doors labeled Treatment Ward. I tried each door, but they were all locked tight. Finally, at the far end of the hall, I found a single door slightly ajar. I pushed it open and slipped inside, slamming it shut behind me. I pressed my back to the door, listening. The chanting outside faded slightly, but it was still there, always there. I turned and took in the room. It was an operating theater. Rust-streaked surgical lights hung above a central table, which was stained dark brown from old blood. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars containing cloudy fluids and floating lumps that looked vaguely human. On a nearby tray, surgical instruments lay scattered, their metal surfaces corroded and flaking. Then, in the far corner, I saw a wheelchair. A figure sat slumped in it, covered in a tattered sheet. I edged closer, every nerve screaming at me to run, but something compelled me forward. When I was just a few feet away, the sheet twitched. My breath caught. I reached out slowly and pulled the sheet back. What I saw underneath nearly stopped my heart. It was a patient, or what was left of one. Its skin was leathery and gray, stretched tightly over its bones. Its eyes were gone, leaving deep, empty sockets. Its mouth hung open in a silent, endless scream. Around its neck was a thick, leather restraint, bolted to the chair. Suddenly, its head snapped up. Even without eyes, it seemed to look directly at me. It raised one skeletal arm, its bony fingers pointing toward the operating table. I turned to look and saw a journal lying there. Its cover was cracked and stained. I picked it up, hands trembling, and opened it to the first page. Scrawled in a messy, frantic hand were the words, "We never left, and neither will you." I stared at the journal, my vision blurring from tears and terror. My mind screamed at me to drop it and run, but my hands wouldn't let go. The pages felt wet and sticky, as if they had been dipped in something rotten. I turned the next page, and my flashlight flickered again, casting long, frantic shadows around the room. The writing inside was messy, as though the author had been scribbling in a panic. They said the treatments would make us better. The injections, the surgeries. They lied. We hear them in our heads now. We see the others. We can't stop them. We can't stop ourselves. On the following pages, there were rough drawings, dark, jagged sketches of patients strapped to beds, their eyes wide with terror. One drawing showed a group of doctors surrounding a patient, holding tools that looked more like torture devices than medical instruments. Another page showed something worse: a tall, thin figure with elongated arms and a face twisted into a permanent scream. Behind it, patients knelt in rows, as if worshipping it. A loud bang came from outside the room, followed by hurried footsteps scraping across the hallway floor. I jumped, nearly dropping the journal. The figure in the wheelchair began to convulse, its head jerking violently side to side. A low, gurgling sound bubbled from its throat, like something trying to breathe through water. I backed away, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might black out. The gurgling turned into a high-pitched wail. Suddenly, the door behind me slammed open, smashing into my back. I stumbled forward and fell onto the operating table. The room filled with an icy wind, and the chanting returned, louder, closer, as if dozens of voices were now right outside the door. I rolled off the table, scrambling to my feet, and ran into the hallway. The chanting surrounded me. "We never left! We never left! We never left!" I turned toward the stairs, but standing at the top was the tall, thin figure from the drawings. Its head hung limply, jerking slightly as if trying to lift itself. Its arms were grotesquely long, fingers almost reaching the floor. It began to move toward me, each step impossibly slow and silent, but it felt like it was closing the distance faster than I could react. I turned and sprinted down the hallway, throwing open doors, searching for any way out. One door led to a large room filled with old hospital beds. Sheets hung from the ceiling like ghostly curtains, swaying in the cold breeze that had no source. As I ran between the beds, I heard them, patients whispering from under the sheets. Their hands shot out, grabbing at my clothes and skin. Their fingers felt cold and damp, nails sharp as broken glass. They pulled and clawed at me, tearing my shirt, scraping my arms. I screamed and yanked myself free, stumbling out into another hallway. I slammed the door shut behind me and pressed my back against it, gasping. The whispers continued on the other side, angry and desperate. I looked around and realized I was standing in front of a large metal door labeled hydrotherapy. I pushed it open and slipped inside, hoping to lose whatever was chasing me. Inside, the air was freezing. Large metal bathtubs lined the walls, each one with thick leather straps for restraining patients. Rust-colored stains covered the floors and tubs. Chains hung from the ceiling, swaying gently as if someone had just let go. In the far corner, a single bathtub was filled with dark water. I approached it cautiously, unable to stop myself from looking inside. As I peered over the edge, two pale hands shot up, grabbing my wrists. A face emerged from the water, bloated, eyeless, its mouth opening wide enough to split the skin at the edges. I tried to pull away, but its grip was inhumanly strong. It began to pull me toward the water, its jaws snapping open and closed, drool and dark water spilling out. I kicked and thrashed wildly, finally wrenching one arm free and smashing my flashlight against its head. With a wet crack, its grip loosened, and I stumbled backward, falling hard onto the tiles. The thing slid back under the water, vanishing completely, leaving only ripples behind. I scrambled to my feet and bolted for the door, slamming it behind me. I could hear water sloshing violently in the room as I ran. Out in the hallway again, the chanting returned. "We never left. We never left." I turned a corner and found a small, rotting wooden door labeled Records. I slipped inside, shoving a chair against the knob to block it. The room was filled with decaying file cabinets and shelves stacked with yellowed folders. A single dim light bulb flickered overhead. I collapsed to the floor, catching my breath. After a moment, I forced myself to look through the files, hoping to find answers, maybe even a map out of this nightmare. I pulled a thick folder labeled Experimental Treatments, 1951. Inside were faded photographs of patients after procedures. Their faces were twisted and broken, eyes stitched shut or completely missing, limbs bent at impossible angles. Handwritten notes accompanied each photo. Subject did not survive initial injection. Subject shows increased aggression and is no longer coherent. Subject refuses to die despite multiple attempts at termination. My stomach churned. Then, at the bottom of the folder, I found a small photograph of the tall, thin figure. Underneath, scrawled in red ink, Dr. Hollow, the overseer, failed to transcend humanity, now walks these halls endlessly. I felt bile rise in my throat. That thing chasing me, it wasn't a patient, it was their doctor, a monster born from his own experiments, now cursed to roam the asylum forever. And now, it had seen me. Suddenly, the chair against the door shuddered violently. Something was pounding on it from the other side, hard enough to make splinters rain down onto my shoulders. The chanting rose to a deafening roar. "We never left. You can't leave. You can't leave." I grabbed the journal and the folder, clutching them to my chest. The door cracked. A pale, twisted hand pushed through the opening, fingers twitching wildly. I screamed and ran to a small window on the far wall. I smashed it with the flashlight, shoving shards aside with my bleeding hands. Cold night air rushed in. I climbed through, tumbling into the overgrown courtyard below. I looked up. In the broken window above me, I saw Dr. Hollow. His head hung limp, but his empty eye sockets seemed to lock onto mine. Slowly, he raised one long arm and pointed directly at me. I scrambled to my feet and ran across the courtyard, weeds tearing at my legs. I ducked into a narrow alley between two wings of the building, desperate to find an exit. The chanting echoed even out here, as if the entire forest around the asylum was singing along. I turned another corner and froze. A large iron gate loomed in front of me, twisted and rusted but open just wide enough for me to slip through. Beyond it, the forest waited. I didn't look back. I sprinted through the gate, crashing into the underbrush, branches slashing my face and arms. I ran and ran until the chanting finally began to fade. When I finally stopped, I collapsed against a tree, sobbing. I looked at the folder and the journal still clutched in my bloody hands. The final words I had read echoed in my mind. "We never left, and neither will you." I didn't know if I had truly escaped. I didn't know if I ever could. All I knew was that the forest was silent now. Too silent. As if the asylum's darkness had followed me, waiting for its next chance to pull me back. I don't remember how long I lay there against the tree. My body shook uncontrollably, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. All I could hear was my own heartbeat hammering in my skull. Finally, when the cold started to creep into my bones, I forced myself to move. I stood up on trembling legs, clutched the journal and folder tight to my chest, and started walking. The forest felt alive, not in the way forests usually do, but as if it was watching me. Each branch I passed seemed to shiver and reach out. Each shadow seemed to shift in the corner of my vision. I stumbled through the undergrowth, for what felt like hours before I finally saw the faint glow of my car's headlights through the trees. When I reached the car, I almost collapsed with relief. I yanked the door open, threw the journal and folder into the passenger seat, and climbed in. I turned the key. The engine sputtered, then died. I tried again. Sputter. Silence. Panic surged up my throat like bile. I slammed my fists on the steering wheel, screaming. I looked in the rearview mirror and froze. In the beam of the headlights, the forest path behind me was empty. But slowly, shapes began to emerge from the trees. Patients. Dozens of them. Their hospital gowns flapped in the cold night wind. Their faces were pale and twisted, mouths hanging open in silent screams. And behind them, towering above all, was Dr. Hollow. His long arms dragged across the ground, his head lolled to one side, but somehow, even without eyes, I felt him staring straight into my soul. The patients began to shuffle toward me. I turned the key again, sobbing. The engine roared to life. I slammed the gear into reverse, tires spinning on the wet leaves. I shot backward down the path, the shapes in the headlights shuffling closer and closer. Then I threw it into drive and floored the gas, the car lurching forward so violently that my head snapped back against the headrest. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew they were behind me. When I finally reached the main road, I kept driving, my hands locked in a death grip on the wheel. I didn't stop until I reached a cheap roadside motel an hour away. I staggered inside, paid cash, and locked myself in the room. The journal and folder came with me. I couldn't leave them behind. It felt like they had become a part of me now. I collapsed onto the bed, fully clothed, and passed out immediately. When I woke, it was morning. At first, for a blissful moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. Then I saw the journal on the nightstand. I picked it up. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages again. There were entries I didn't remember reading before, entries that hadn't been there. He comes at night. He whispers to us, tells us to follow. We don't want to, but we can't stop. He is inside us now. Even if we leave, he follows. Even if we run, he is there. We never left, and now neither will you. I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder. I lifted my shirt and gasped. The deep scratches from the asylum were still there, but they had grown darker overnight, the edges black and veiny, like something spreading under the skin. My stomach lurched. I stumbled into the bathroom and threw up into the sink. When I looked up into the mirror, I saw them. Shadows, standing behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. I turned back to the mirror. This time, it was just me. But my reflection seemed wrong. My eyes looked sunken, my skin pale and stretched. It almost looked like one of them. I stumbled back into the bedroom, shaking. I needed help. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, but it wasn't a dispatcher. It was a chorus of whispers. "We never left. We never left." I threw the phone across the room. It shattered against the wall, battery skittering under the bed. I fell to my knees, sobbing. That's when I heard it. A knock at the door, software deliberate. I crawled to the peephole and looked out. Nothing. Another knock, louder this time, then a voice, muffled but unmistakable. "Let us in." I backed away from the door, heart hammering in my throat. I grabbed the journal and folder, unsure why I couldn't just abandon them. I needed to escape again. But to where? The motel was surrounded by empty fields and highways, but anything was better than staying. I threw open the window, climbed out, and dropped onto the cracked pavement below. I ran across the parking lot, past abandoned cars and dead streetlights. I didn't look back, but I heard them behind me. Soft footfalls, wet and dragging. I ducked into a gas station nearby. The lights were off, the place abandoned. I hid behind a counter trying to quiet my breaths. Hours passed, or maybe just minutes. Then, through the front windows, I saw them arrive. A mass of pale shapes moved through the parking lot. At the center of them, towering and grotesque, was Dr. Hollow. He stopped directly in front of the station, his head tilted slowly, as if sniffing the air. Then, impossibly, his neck twisted all the way around until his face, or what was left of it, was staring directly at me through the glass. A voice filled my head, louder than before. "You took us with you. You opened the door. Now we are everywhere." I squeezed my eyes shut and screamed, clutching the journal so tightly that my knuckles turned white. When I opened my eyes, the gas station was empty again. No patients, no Dr. Hollow. Silence. I stood slowly, my legs shaking. I looked at the journal. A new page had appeared filled with dark, jagged writing. "You cannot escape. You are one of us now." My reflection in the glass door showed my skin crawling, black veins twisting under it. My eyes had turned dark and hollow. I pressed a trembling hand to my face. It felt like my skin might tear off at any moment. I stumbled outside, the sun just beginning to rise. Birds sang in the distance, but the sound felt wrong, as if it were muffled by something thick and heavy. I looked at the forest beyond the highway. I knew deep inside that the asylum was calling me back, that it would never stop. My feet started moving before I even realized, across the parking lot, over the cracked highway, into the trees. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of hundreds of whispers blending into one final phrase, "We never left." I don't know how long I walked. Time seemed to dissolve around me. Seconds stretching into hours, hours collapsing into a single, endless moment. The trees around me grew thicker, their branches knotting together above like twisted veins. The air smelled of wet earth and rotting leaves, but underneath it was another stench. Chemicals, disinfectant, old blood. I held the journal to my chest. My fingers had fused with the leather cover somehow, as though my skin had grown into it. I stumbled forward until I reached a clearing. At the center stood the asylum. It shouldn't have been there. I had left it miles behind. Yet here it was, rising from the ground like a tumor. Its walls were cracked and covered in black moss, windows shattered or completely gone. The main entrance doors hung open, inviting. A sign above read, "Hollow Sanitarium." Only now the letters seemed to shift and bleed, spelling different words as I watched. "Help us. Never leave. Welcome back." I tried to turn and run, but my feet refused to move. The journal pulsed in my hands, a heartbeat not my own. I was drawn forward, step by step, across the dead grass and through the doors. Inside, the air was thick and heavy, pressing against my skin like wet fabric. The halls twisted in ways that defied geometry. I would turn left and find myself in the same hallway I had just left. Doorways opened onto endless staircases that spiraled into darkness. As I moved, I saw them, the patients. They stood in the corners, staring with empty eyes. Their jaws hung slack, drool dripping onto the floor. Their hands twitched, as though playing an invisible piano. When I tried to look away, I felt their eyes pierce into my mind. I heard them then, not with my ears, but inside my skull. "Join us. You are almost ready." I pressed forward. Somewhere deep inside, a voice, my own, screamed for me to fight, to run. But another voice, stronger, drowned it out. "This is where you belong." I found a stairwell leading down. I descended, each step echoing like a drumbeat. At the bottom was a single metal door labeled Experimental Ward. It swung open as I approached. Inside, the walls were lined with gurneys. Each one held a patient, strapped down with leather restraints. Their skin was thin as parchment, stretched tightly over bone. Their eyes all sewn shut. As I passed, their heads turned toward me, as if sensing my presence. Their mouths began to move in unison. "Welcome back. Welcome home." At the far end of the room stood Dr. Hollow. Taller than before, his head now scraping the ceiling. His arms hung down like dead branches, fingers dragging across the floor. His face had become a gaping hole, a black void that seemed to suck in the flickering light. He began to move toward me, each step making the walls tremble. I wanted to scream, but my throat had closed. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. Dr. Hollow raised one arm, pointing at the journal. A voice thundered inside my mind, deeper and more final than anything I had heard before. "Give yourself to us. Let go of the flesh. Join the echo." The journal writhed in my hands. The pages turned themselves rapidly, images flashing past. Surgeries, screaming patients, the forest paths twisting into veins, my own face splitting open. I felt my fingers dissolve into the leather cover. The skin of my arms darkened, veins bulging and pulsing like worms under glass. My vision dimmed at the edges. Through the fog of pain, a single thought pushed forward. Fight. I clamped down on that thought with everything I had left. With a last surge of strength, I ripped the journal away from my chest. My skin tore as I did, a spray of black fluid hitting the floor. Dr. Hollow shrieked, the sound like metal tearing across bone. I raised the journal above my head. Somehow, I knew what I had to do. I slammed it down onto the ground again and again, pages tearing, binding splitting. Each impact sent a shockwave through the room. The patients on the gurneys began to convulse, their sewn eyes leaking black tears. Dr. Hollow howled, stumbling backward. His void face began to crack, lines of light seeping through. I kept smashing the journal until it was nothing but a pulp of paper and flesh-like fragments. The walls around me cracked open, revealing an endless void beyond. Wind roared through the room, sucking in debris, gurneys, even some of the patients. Dr. Hollow fell to his knees, his body disintegrating into a cloud of ash. I was being pulled too. I felt my feet slide across the floor, my body growing lighter. Just as I began to slip into the void, a hand grabbed mine. A small, cold hand. I looked down. It was one of the patients, their eyes finally open, clear and human. They pulled me back, away from the edge. The wind stopped. Silence fell, so sudden it rang in my ears. I looked around. The patients had collapsed onto the floor, their bodies no longer twitching or whispering. Dr. Hollow was gone. Nothing left but a black stain on the ground. I fell to my knees, gasping. My skin slowly began to return to normal. The black veins receded. The journal was gone, completely destroyed. Then I heard it. A faint voice, the child who had grabbed me. "Thank you. You let us go." I turned to them, but they were fading, turning to dust that drifted upward and vanished. One by one, the other patients also faded, each leaving behind a final sigh of relief. When I stood, the walls of the asylum began to crumble. Chunks of ceiling crashed down, windows shattered outward, spraying glass into the void. I staggered out of the ward and up the stairs, my body moving on instinct, through the collapsing halls, past empty rooms, now echoing with silence. When I burst through the front doors, the entire building shuddered behind me. I turned and watched as the asylum imploded, sucked into a swirling black vortex that snapped shut with a deafening crack. Then, nothing. The forest was still. The sun was rising, the sky painted with warm pink and orange streaks. Birds chirped softly. It looked normal. I fell to my knees and wept. For the first time, the tears felt clean. I stood shakily and began to walk, leaving the clearing behind. I didn't know where I was going or who I would be when I got there. All I knew was that I was free, or so I hoped. Because even now, when the wind rustles through the trees, I sometimes hear a faint whisper. We never left. I don't remember how I got back to my car. The forest felt different now, lighter, almost hollow, as though something vital had been torn out of it. I drove in a daze, every mile stretching endlessly. The roads blurred past, and even as the trees receded, I felt them breathing behind me. Eventually, I reached my apartment. It looked the same as when I left. The flickering porch light, the uncollected mail, the broken step. But stepping inside, I felt like a stranger entering someone else's home. I dropped my keys on the floor. They rattled into a corner, but I didn't bother to pick them up. I went straight to the bathroom. I needed to see my face. The mirror reflected a haggard figure I barely recognized. Dark circles clung under my eyes. My skin looked almost translucent. The places where the black veins had been still felt sore, like old burn scars. I pressed my fingertips to my cheek. Was I really free? Or had I just carried the infection deeper inside me? I began tearing through my apartment, searching for any sign that I might have brought something back. I flipped mattresses, checked inside closets, tore open kitchen cabinets. Each time I opened a dark space, I half expected to see a pale shape peering back at me. Eventually, I collapsed on the living room floor, gasping. In my mind, I heard a faint echo. We never left. That night I tried to sleep, but my dreams dragged me back to the asylum. I saw Dr. Hollow standing at the end of an endless corridor, his head twisted all the way around, grinning with that gaping hole where his face should have been. I heard patients screaming, clawing at their restraints, the walls pulsing like a living lung. I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, my throat raw from screaming. Over the next few days, I tried to return to normal life. I went to work. People stared. My co-workers avoided me in the halls, their eyes darting away whenever I looked at them. In meetings, I saw them glance at the dark lines still faintly snaking up my neck, like scars I couldn't explain. At home, the air felt heavy. The shadows seemed to move when I wasn't looking. I heard knocks at the door in the middle of the night. Sometimes soft, sometimes loud enough to shake the walls. When I looked through the peephole, there was never anyone there. But once, just once, I thought I saw a pale hand slip around the corner before vanishing into the dark. On the 7th night, I heard whispers coming from the living room. I crept out of bed, every nerve in my body screaming. There, in the glow of the moonlight through the window, I saw a figure, thin, shaking, its back turned to me. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Slowly, it turned. Its face was a blank, pale void. It took a step toward me, its body rippling like liquid. I fell backward, scrambling into the bedroom and slamming the door shut. I pressed my back against it, listening to the creaking floorboards on the other side. Then silence. When I finally opened the door again at sunrise, the living room was empty. Except, on the coffee table lay a single torn page from the journal. My heart almost stopped. I picked it up with trembling fingers. "You cannot destroy us. You only set us free." I dropped the page, feeling something inside me break. I ran to the bathroom mirror again. My reflection stared back, but it wasn't quite right. Its eyes were too dark, the pupils too wide. Its smile twitched at the corners, even though I wasn't smiling. I reached out, touching the glass. My reflection did not move. Instead, it leaned forward slowly, pressing its forehead to the mirror. Then its lips parted, and I heard the whisper so close I felt it against my skin. We never left. The mirror spiderwebbed with cracks, but didn't shatter. Behind each crack, I saw dozens of other faces, patients, all staring at me, some weeping, some smiling, all waiting. I stumbled backward and fell to the floor. The room around me began to blur, the walls melting into hospital corridors. I smelled disinfectant, heard the distant echo of surgical saws. I squeezed my eyes shut. When I opened them, I was no longer in my apartment. I stood at the end of a hallway lined with patient rooms. A single overhead bulb flickered, buzzing like an insect caught in a jar. I turned to run, but the hallway stretched endlessly in both directions. Behind me, I heard the slow, heavy footfalls. Dr. Hollow emerged from the shadows, his body taller than ever, arms almost scraping the floor, his head tilted toward me, that black void gaping wider. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. He raised a hand and pointed to the nearest room. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, a bed sat under a single light. Straps hung from the frame, ready and waiting. I felt my legs move on their own. I stepped forward. Dr. Hollow followed, his hollow mouth stretching in what might have been a smile. I lay down on the bed. The straps wound around my wrists and ankles like living snakes, pulling me tight. Above, the light buzzed, growing brighter and brighter until it was blinding. I heard voices all around me. One of us, one of us, one of us. The light flared, and everything turned white. When I opened my eyes again, I was staring at a ceiling I didn't recognize. I tried to move, but my arms wouldn't respond. Looking down, I realized I was strapped to a gurney. I saw shapes moving around me. Doctors, orderlies. Their faces were blurred, as if covered in a thick fog. One of them leaned closer. Through the haze, I saw its face begin to form. Dr. Hollow. He leaned in until I felt his breath on my ear. We never left. I screamed, the sound echoing forever down the endless halls. And now, if you ever feel a sudden chill in your room, if you hear soft footsteps in your hallway at night, if you glimpse a pale figure in the corner of your eye, remember, we never left. If you enjoyed this nightmare, like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.